Okay, so I'll start off now. This is Jillian Acevedo with the Army Heritage Center Foundation. Today is February 16th, 2022, and I am at the Army Heritage Center Foundation via Zoom to conduct an oral history interview of
Brian Smith.
a veteran of the United States Army for the Veterans Oral History Project. In addition, today's interviewers are
Sami Kazi
and Vernika Udekumar.
Okay, thank you so much. And do you all consent to being recorded for the interview?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I will take my video off and we can go ahead and get started, okay?
Okay.
Now, Mr. Smith, would you mind saying your full name once again and spelling it out, please?
It's Brian Thomas Smith, Brian Thomas Smith.
Thank you. So before we get started, I just wanted to thank you again for coming here with your time. So our first question is, where were you born?
Here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, and what did your parents do?
My mother babysit all of her life. I think it was like 42 years in total. So that was her career. And my father did a variety of different things. He also was in the Army for a short period of time during World War II.
Oh, okay. So would you say that that was another influence that helped you join the military?
Somewhat. Had some bearing.
Other than that, were there any other influences?
Well, probably the biggest influence was I went to a vocational technical school, Dauphin County Votech. I think your Cumberland Valley has something similar. And I took drafting and design technology. And when I was in my senior year, I was fortunate enough to have a job every afternoon and worked at a place called Crop Tool Company. And at Crop Tool Company, I was the only draftsman there because drafting and design was my specialty. And when I used to go there in the afternoon, I sat at a drafting table looking out of the window, not more than 3-4 feet away from me. And as I sat there my senior year, looking out that window, I just couldn't imagine possibly doing that for the rest of my life. But at the same time, I had really no idea of what else I might want to do. I did know that I enjoyed the outdoors. So when it was probably in January of 1978, just prior to my graduation in a few months, I thought, well, maybe I'll join the Army. And I went to an Army recruiter and actually in Union Deposit, if you know where Union Deposit is, across the river from you guys. And I told him that, I'd like to join the Army. And he says, well, what do you want to do? And I says, well, I just want to be a soldier. and he says, I'm looking at your test scores and I see you have some drafting background. And he says, maybe the thing for you to be is to join the artillery. We'll put you in the artillery and you can use your drafting skills, which I thought was kind of funny. And I look back and I really enjoyed that now. But that was probably the biggest reason why I joined. Just really no direction at the time, no additional desires. And it was a good place for a young man to start out. And I didn't want to go to school, was not a good student. Things have changed since then. I've graduated college 4-year degree with cum laude, but back then I had zero interest. So that was the big thing, just getting away from the bad influences that I was involved in at the time and getting some discipline and growing up.
Now, Mr. Smith, were you an officer or an enlisted member?
I was enlisted.
So, so what do you remember about the day that you were enlisted?
I remember raising my hand and swearing an oath. I can picture the place. There may even still be a recruiter station there, but I knew that I remember that I knew I was taking a step into the unknown. And I knew it was the step that I needed to take, though.
So did your parents, did they support this decision? It seemed like you went Army and went right for it.
Yes, actually, my father had passed away prior to that, but I had a great stepfather who was also in the Army and in his time. And my mother was a spoiled only child, so she wasn't excited about me joining the Army, but she did support me, yes.
Now, how did your perspective change of the military change from before you joined it and after you became a member of it?
That's a great question. Before I went in, I really didn't have a whole lot of idea what to expect. It was, I think I was looking for some discipline. And when I went in, I surely got that initially. And then probably about a year in, I was somewhat disappointed, and I still had that young rebel with a cause, or without a cause, I should say, mentality, and I didn't like it a lot, really, in the beginning. So I thought for sure then that this was not the thing for me, and I was only 1 year in. But then, fortunately, I had an assignment, and you're going to probably ask the questions later about what that was. And during that assignment, I grew up. My mentality changed completely, and I became the soldier that I was supposed to be, and became a man, actually. So things changed drastically over a period of first 2 years in the service.
So you're talking about how it helped you become like a man, get that maturity. Yeah. So what training did you go through? What experiences do you remember in that training?
Well, the first training we had, of course, was the one that everybody goes through, and it was called Basic Combat Training. That was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And I was there with that for, I think it was like 2 months. And it was very hot, very, very rigorous, and the discipline was the biggest thing that they taught, and camaraderie. I learned very quick when I joined, or when I went in and stood in front of the drill sergeants. You've probably seen the stories or heard the stories about how the drill sergeant walks onto the bus and says, "You've got 5 seconds to get off this bus, and 4 of them are already gone." And and everybody's scrambling and getting off the bus, and you're standing at attention, in front of this bus, and they're in your face and screaming and hollering at you. And real quick, you learn that the guy next to you, and nowadays the gal too, were the ones that helped you stay stable, and they were your friends, your brothers, your sisters, and just it was one of those things where they drilled the discipline into you immediately. And I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, and maybe I should elaborate more if you'd like. It's up to you.
Oh, we don't mind if you want to go ahead and continue about training. I think it's a very interesting topic.
Okay, yes, it was training. Yeah, during that training, we did a lot of physical training in the morning early, and we wore our fatigue pants, a white T-shirt, and combat boots. And we got out and we did the push-ups, the side straddle hops, which as a jumping jack. We did runs. We did many runs, and one of the things I can remember from the runs was where if one guy would fall back and couldn't make the run, they would turn our whole platoon around and go back and get that guy and start running again. And if the next guy or the same guy would fall out again, we'd turn around and go back and get them. And it made it so that we knew that we couldn't leave one man behind. And that helped not only us learn how to be better with our brothers and sisters, but also it helped that person know that there was somebody behind them, which I thought was very, very interesting. And during that time and basic training, we also trained with weapons, first aid. Some of the weapons back then were the M16 machine gun, it's all fully automatic rifle, I should say, M60 machine gun, the law, which was a light anti-tank weapon, and grenade launchers. We threw grenades and all that stuff we thought was really cool to be able to do, you know, and we did a fair amount of it as well. So I was very impressed with that. We learned about nuclear, biological, and chemical threats and what to do, how to wear a gas mask. We went into gas chambers and tested them. We went on road marches and bivouacked out in the woods for, you know, days and days at a time. And it was basically the primary goal was to teach you a variety of different skills while you were there. And then also at the same time, teach you that discipline and that brotherhood and camaraderie to take care of your brothers and sisters. After basic training, it came the advanced individual training, and that's where I was able to use my artillery skills. and I, because of my scores and having the drafting background, they placed me in the Fire Direction Center. So when you think of artillery, you think of cannons shooting and you know long distances and everything, and which we did, but my job was to calculate the firing data for those cannons. So we manually, and we had like slide rules where you could slide to the range, the distance to the target, and it would tell you what the quadrant would be, which is how high the cannon should be elevated. And then based on the drift of the round, because it spins as it comes out, how much to adjust for the deflection. So told you which way, left and right, to shoot. So when you laid your howitzers, it pointed a certain way, and you could get within, I think it was like 10, I think it was within 10 meters was our accuracy at a distance of 15 miles, even at some point. So that was what the training that came next with my advanced individual training. There was also, you know, and then I was then assigned to my first unit following that training. So that was in total of 3 to 4 months between basic and then advanced individual training when I then moved to my first unit. And at that point, you started training more specifically for objectives. For example, my first unit, we were one of the first units to train at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. And we went there and it was all desert. It's just all desert. And I was wondering, but to myself, why then? And I didn't keep up on the current affairs and things like that back then at all. And I was wondering why we were out in the desert training. And then I learned later that that's when there was a lot of activity going on between like Russia and Afghanistan. So there was a lot of desert warfare occurring. So they were getting us ready in case we were going to end up in a place like that. So that's a lot of that kind of thing occurred throughout my time in the military, as well as leadership training. The military and the Army was very good at training us how to be leaders, basic leadership skills. And when you're an enlisted person, and I'm sure it's as well with the officers, you have certain classes you go to as you reach established ranks. So you have to go to this class in order to be promoted. To go to the next class, you have to be promoted. All basically with pertaining to leadership. Other training that we received, mostly was out in the field, practicing with the weapons, the artillery pieces and the calculations for the artillery data. Trying to think if there's anything else that sticks out in my mind. Just ongoing weapons practicing, nuclear, biological, chemical testing of your masks and how you do that. And probably one of the training aspects that reminds me of, or that I recall very well, is when I was in a while and had been promoted to sergeant and was in a leadership position, and they said, "You're going to run the gas chamber." I was like, "Oh, okay." I remember going through that in basic training. Okay, I can do that. And one of the things you did when you were in basic training and did this is at the end, once everybody's done their calisthenics with the mask on to make sure that it's sealed and you're not breathing this chemical agent that they have in there. It was this little capsule they put and they burned, and it gave off a little smoke. And one of the things they did is when you were done, they said, "Anybody want to," well, back in basic, it wasn't anybody if you want to, but take your mask off and say your name, rank, and your serial number. And then you could walk out. So when you do that, so as you start talking, your face starts burning, your eyes start watering, you start choking, and you get that out, and then you get out of that chamber as quickly as you can and air out, right? So I thought I was going to be a good NCO, a good leader, and do that with the guys that were going through my chamber, which I ran all day long. Well, I got about halfway through the day, and every time I said, "I'm going to do it first," setting the example. You got to set the example when you're a leader. So I'd do it, say my name, rank, serial number, out the door I'd go. I think after about 10 times of doing that, I could hardly speak anymore. my throat was burning. It was raw. I felt like I was raw in there. And I was like, "Okay, buddy, hey, you got to take over from here on out." And I suffered for like 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
So, it's a funny story, but as a leader, you had to set the example. And if you were going to ask somebody else to do something, you could better be willing to do it yourself. Unfortunately, I did it way too many times. But there's training. Training was, especially for me being in peacetime, training was the majority of what we did every day. I mean, we were either taking care of our vehicles or we were doing some form of training, whether it was first aid, whether it was nuclear, biological, chemical training, practicing with our weapons, just constantly. I was fortunate enough to be in peacetime 3 years after Vietnam and 3 years before the war in the Gulf, like little better than 8 year period right there. And so really all we had to do was train. That was the majority of our time, was training.
You briefly mentioned rank and how that differs between enlistment officers, right? What was the highest rank that you held in the military?
I was a staff sergeant, E6, enlisted person, grade 6.
And would you mind elaborating on what all the ranks mean and how they differ between enlisted men and officers?
Well, officers are kind of like on a totally different scale. Typically, officers are the better educated, meaning mostly that they've attended college before they even went in, and they start out as a lieutenant, a second lieutenant. For an enlisted person, they go in. There's no necessary background for education other than, I think the requirement back then was you had to have either a GED or you had to have graduated high school. And then you started as an enlisted person one, a private. And you work your way up, and the officers' ranks and enlisted ranks pretty much work the same way. You have to have so much time in service before you can be eligible to be promoted to the next level of rank. And then also they have a point system. So we talked a lot about training, and let's just say, for instance, if I wanted to get promoted from an E3 to an E4, I had to have so many years in service, and I had to have so many points. And you get points for things like, for example, college credits. We had points for schools that you've attended, points for if you took correspondence courses to try to better yourself and learn about different subject areas and everything. So as a point system combined with time and service, that's how you were promoted.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, do you think you could list the units that you served in, like specifically the dates too, and the positions you were in those units?
Sure. Matter of fact, I wrote down my list so I'd make sure I remember. So I have exact dates for you. When I went in, I talked about basic training and AIT. That was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, at the U.S. Army Field Artillery School. And that was from June 28th of 78 to September 27th of 78. And my job there basically was just to be a trainee. You know, I'm a private E1. I'm just learning the ropes, learning about the camaraderie and learning how to take care of each other. And that was pretty much it. You know, it was day to day, boom, boom, boom. I think at one time in that time period, we had a day off where we were allowed to actually go off post and do something, you know, get outside the post. So that was Fort Sill, Oklahoma. My next assignment, and I'm not even sure what the name of that unit was, but the next assignment was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and well known for its gold bullion depository, I believe they call it. And that was from September of 78 to March of 1980. And that was with the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Field Artillery, and I was in headquarters battery. Matter of fact, that's what this guide on here represents. The headquarters battery, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Field Artillery. And I was with the 194th Armor Brigade. And I was a private to a specialist 4, E4, during that time period. And my job was basically a chart operator, as I talked to you before about how we calculated firing data. So we had a big chart with grids laid out on it that represented the kilometers distances, and we'd plot our position and we'd plot the position of our target and lay it out on there, and we could determine then what the range was to the target and the deflection. And so that was pretty much what I did there, chart operator. Also, while I was there, I learned a lot about taking care of small engines, because we had generators that operated our computer back then. Yes, that was a computer, and it was my first computer I ever saw in my life. But which we should elaborate on a little bit later. You'll appreciate. And then also took care of, you know, basically cleaning all the equipment and all that type of thing. So that was the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Field Artillery. My next assignment was in Camp Stanley in Korea. That was from May of 80 to June of 1981. And that was about, I think it was about 15 to 17 miles away from the demilitarized zone, the Korean demilitarized zone. And then also while there, we actually spent 42 days, my unit spent 42 days up on the DMZ, militarized zone. So I was literally just a little better than half a mile away from the enemy, the North Koreans. And there's probably and that's when I grew up. Because I woke up, I was like, wait a minute, where are we going? I don't know if I like this very much. But while there, I was a specialist 4, and then was eventually promoted to sergeant while still there. And my job was computer. Instead of working the charts, what I started doing was taking those slide rules that we talked about and using computers and calculating the firing data on the computers and on those slide rules and with manual calculations. Also learned how to calculate using the meteorological data. So we would get this sheet that would say, here's what the wind direction, wind speed is, air density, and 1 or 2 other things at this elevation. Here's what it is for this elevation. Here's what it is for this elevation. And we'd take that data and literally do this computation sheet. It took about 15 minutes to do. And calculate firing data so that when the round went up through the air, it knew how to adjust for each of those, each of those things that were occurring, that the elements at each elevation. So we did that there. So my job was basically computer. Then after Camp Stanley, Korea, I went to Fort Hood, Texas. And oh, by the way, I was with the 1st Battalion, 38th Field Artillery Alpha Battery in the 2nd Infantry Division while there in Korea. Then after that, went to Fort Hood, Texas, and that's 1st Battalion, 82nd Field Artillery, Bravo Battery, 1st Cavalry Division. Excuse me. And when I arrived there, I was a sergeant. I had never been responsible for an entire fire direction center before, like being the boss of it. I was like the 2nd guy in line back in Korea towards the end. But in a short period of time, I was assigned as the section chief. They called it chief fire direction specialist, they called it. And so my job was basically to supervise all those guys that did the jobs that I did before, the chart operator, the computer operator, the manual computer, and then also take care of the section. And we had a fire direction officer who was my boss. And he was basically in charge, but the NCOs typically were the more experienced and knowledgeable in that area, because the officers were just coming out of school, kind of like I was when I was a private E1, and just learning the ropes. And the officers, they would be in charge, but they would have a guy like me, the NCO, to take care of all the little details and everything. And but while there, a lot of great things happened there for me. For the first time in my life, I ever had my own place that I lived, because the barracks were full. I was still single, but the barracks were full and they needed to get us off post. So they said to me, hey, you can't stay on post anymore, but we're going to pay you bachelor's allowance for quarters and separate rations so that you can stay off post. And I'm like, that's great. So went and found myself a place that had a pool and palm trees lining it, and had my first place ever. And that's the first time I ever had cable television as well, I might add. And at that time, and remember I said earlier, for promotions, you needed time in service, but you also needed points. And I decided at that time too to start going to college classes, in the evenings and stuff, here and there. I didn't do a lot because we spent a lot of time in the field. And when I was with the 1st of the 82nd, 1st Cav, we did a lot of field trips, not only locally there at Fort Hood, but we also went to Reforger from there, Return of Forces to Germany. And that ran for a long time. I think I have notes somewhere when that occurred. Wow, I'll hold up. But every year for 2 or 3 decades, the United States did this thing they called Reforger, Return of Forces to Germany. And they would basically just load everything up and go to Europe, pick up supplies in Europe, and then act like we were being attacked by the Russians coming across the Fulda Gap in East Germany. And we went through that thing every year while I was with the 1st Cavalry Division. So that was very interesting. And then we also went from, while in the 1st Cav, down to Fort Irwin, California again, the National Training Center, for the desert training as well. While at Fort Hood, I also was involved in going to Michigan a couple of times to evaluate National Guard units, and to help National Guard units train in preparations for their annual testing, and to see how they were doing, to help them out in any way we could. Following Fort Hood, I went to Germany. I was assigned to Germany. And when I first got there, I was sent to Baumholder, Germany. And it's the location for then was the division artillery was located there. And my orders just said bomb holder Germany, division artillery. So I was really not assigned to any specific unit like these. I was assigned to a bigger, larger group. And typically what they do is they then, once you get there, they say, oh, okay, well, we need help over here at the 29th Field Artillery, or we need help over here. And apparently they didn't have any place really for me to go. So I got a very interesting assignment. The first 2 weeks I was there, they said, well, we're going to put you inside of the driver's testing. And I said, driver's testing? And I said, I don't even have a driver's badge, no less, And they said, oh, no, it's multiple choice answers. So here, what it was every day I would go to this big classroom, huge classroom, and there'd be 50 to 100 people taking this test for their Europe driver's license. And I would give them a short briefing, hand out tests, score tests, and off they would go, pass or fail. And I thought, this is really strange for an artilleryman to be doing this kind of job, And then they surprised me and they said, well, we're going to send you to range control. And I said, range control? Well, what's that? And they said, oh, we'll just see when you get there. So it was only about 5 miles away. And I got there, and basically my job was to train the officers on safety for each of the firing ranges that they had there at Bomb Holder. And that included anything from firing a 45 handgun all the way up to shooting missiles. So the interesting thing there was I got to learn a lot about a variety of different weaponry, and it was a German ran range. So I'd go after my training on the Mondays. After that, I would go in the morning over to the German range control, meet with the Germans. They would issue me range packets. And then I would then come back and then issue them to the American officers so that they could go fire on each of these different firing ranges. So that was a pretty cool job. And there was one thing that occurred there. You're going to ask me later, because I think it's on your list about people influences, but we'll talk about that then. And after I was there about a year, I was like, maybe I should go down to a firing unit. So then I went to the Alpha Battery, 6th Battalion, 29th Field Artillery, and I spent the remaining time in the military with that unit. And that was just a short distance away as well. We even at one point fired from an off-post firing point nearly over top of my house in Germany into the bomb holder range. So I thought that was kind of cool. And also participated in Reforger there, because units that were there in Germany did participate as well on that big Reforger activity that was occurring every year. Really enjoyed it there. The best thing probably about that location was getting to do trips, because we went to Paris, France. We went to Switzerland. We went to Spain. Just every weekend tried to get away and do a little bit, but took some longer trips as well. So seeing Europe, Europe was very beautiful, and really enjoyed a lot of my time there. So that's all the units that I was in, and I got out after that last one in Germany.
Now, obviously you've had a very diverse career, but what do you consider to be your biggest accomplishment that you've done throughout your time in the military?
Biggest accomplishment, I'd say that becoming a leader of men was probably the best thing that I accomplished while I was there, because I took and because of the training that the Army gave me, I was able to take that, and I learned that everybody in my section, because I had 8 to 10 guys at a time working for me, and then towards the end there actually had like 16, take a personal interest in each one of them and make sure that they had the same opportunities that I did all the way along. Then I coached them on how to get more points and how to be a better soldier. I was very big on the counseling, individual counseling. So every month I always met with my guys individually, talked to them about how they were doing, and if they had any concerns or issues, and just basically taking care of them. Because a lot of guys that were coming into the units that I was in were just young guys. I mean, you're talking 17, 18 years old, coming in. And by then I'd been in a while, and, I'm up in, my early 20s, not that that's really old or anything, but, a lot of experience had come to me in that short period of time, over a period of 8 years. So I think my biggest accomplishment was how I led my team.
Yeah, it seems to be a very good leader. It's important to have that relationship with people. So do you still have any contact with those people that you had in these units, or remember anybody?
Just a couple. Unfortunately, back then, there was no Facebook, social media. We were lucky if we had a home telephone. So one of the bad things about the military back then was just that you rotated from unit to unit to unit to unit, and then at the same time everybody else around you, they were doing the same thing. So you were lucky if you ever got a 2-3 year period with the same person. But there were some people, fortunately, that I did stay in contact with. At this point, right now, there's only 2 people out of all the people that I actually am in contact with from back then. And that was thankfully as a result of social media. I saw them on Facebook groups that were like military groups, and they were on there as well. So yeah, you lose a lot of friends. You gain a lot of friends, but you lose a lot of friends as well.
Now, leadership, of course, is a very big thing, but you at some point had to also be led. So from those experiences, what do you think characterizes a good leader from a bad one?
Probably a good leader from a bad one is one, a good leader will listen. A good leader will listen to what their subordinates have to say, and they will make you feel like the best thing for you to do is to grow. You just keep getting better and better and better. And a good leader will help their people grow and develop through all times, and there's times that are great, there's times that are bad. And even during those bad times, you got to stand by them, and you got to make sure that you pick them back up off the floor and get them going again.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say the flags they're very nice. When we first joined, that was the first thing I saw. So it's just a question from my end. Did you were you gifted these, or make them? I'm not.
That's a great question. These are called guidons. Each unit, when I say units are a variety of levels. There's divisions, there's brigades, there's battalions, there's companies. Companies and batteries are kind of the same level. But in a company and battery level, there's probably about, I'd say 50 to 70 people in total. And when you meet for physical training, PT in the morning, when you're marching, when you're doing parades, that 50 to 70 people each has their own guidon, and that's what these are. So each one of these represents a group of that 50 to 70 people. Now, they weren't gifted to me, unfortunately. I did get a lot of gifts, a lot of cool things while I was at different units, but none of them gave me any of these. But I thought they were kind of cool and represent a lot about, where you've been, what you've done. My wife was kind enough to sew the division patches on each one for me. So they're typically not on there. And then I've also added unit crests. You can probably barely see them little unit crests on there. So they're a little different. But and this one's really different. That's the one, remember, in bomb holder, when I said I had, this strange assignment, like, what am I doing at range control? And by the way, everybody there was a linguist and spoke German. Every one of them went to Monterey, California, and learned how to speak German. And I walked in there and they started speaking German to me, and I was like, I don't speak German. They said, well, what the heck are you doing here? I said, I have no idea. But yeah, that's what each of those are. And I just recently got them. And they weren't cheap either.
I can imagine.
I've been slowly building my military memorabilia back up. Now that I can afford it, I'm older and I have some money in my pocket.
Yeah, they're great. That's why I was just curious about them.
Yes, thank you.
So, as for I guess final thoughts. So, how has the military affected your life outside of the military or afterwards? Has there been any guiding principles that have kind of stuck with you?
Absolutely. One of the things that was tremendous for me was the camaraderie. And I learned when I went into the military how it's teamwork. You work as a team to accomplish goals. Unfortunately, when I got out of the Army, the philosophy that I learned there wasn't quite the same as it was in the military. I remember my first job, I was pretty gung-ho. I was like, okay, let's knock this out. Let's get this job done. And people just kind of looked at me like, what's he, he's trying to get ahead. And I'm like, this is what I learned. This is the way it's supposed to work. So that was one of the biggest things, is just going for it, learning how to just be aggressive about everything you do. When you do it 110%. And again, it was a little bit different when I first got out, and a lot of people didn't quite get me. And in some cases, they didn't even like me. I think they thought I was a threat to them, and which I was no threat. I just, was doing it 110% like I learned to do for the last almost 9 years. Probably also the leadership skills. That was something that the Army taught me very well. I mean, I had no idea how to be a leader before I went in. The training that they provided me and the examples that a lot of people set, were just amazing. And that kind of leads to the story. I'm not sure how close we are to being done. I guess we got time. There was one officer that made a great impression on me, and this is a really great story. I had mentioned when I was at Fort Hood, I had my own section for the first time. I was a sergeant, and I ended up getting promoted to staff sergeant right about the same time. And this lieutenant came in. He was our fire direction officer. Again, he was right out of school here. I had been in 4 years or so, and his name was Lieutenant Halverson. And Lieutenant Halverson, he was really good leader. He knew that he was young, new to this, and I'd been in 4 or 5 years, what I was doing. So he kind of like just sat back. Okay, Sergeant Smith, do your thing. Let's go. Let's get this done. You got it, sir. You got it. We're on it. And so we did our thing. And then he left and went somewhere. And then shortly after that, I left and was assigned to that range control job where I was supposed to speak German. And I did my training one Monday for the officers. In comes Captain Halverson. I was like, oh, look at you. You got promoted. And he says, what the heck are you doing here at this job? I said, be honest, sir, I don't know. I don't have any idea how I ended up getting this job. I didn't ask for it. He said, you belong in the line unit. I said, oh, yeah, maybe. And then a week or two later, he came back in and he picked up his range packet because he was getting ready to go fire some artillery somewhere. And he says, you need to get your butt out of here and back down to the line unit. And he says, anytime you ever want to go, he says, you just let me know. He says, I'll find a spot for you. I said, okay, okay. I kind of blew it off a little bit. And about that same time, the management there at Range Control was for some reason giving us artillery guys a hard time. I was like, I'm not sure why they're doing this, And I was like, okay, well, and three of us, one guy was getting ready to leave. He was getting ready to get moved to the next duty station. Another guy, Larry Hall, and we said, yeah, maybe we ought to look for another job somewhere, kind of miss the artillery anyway, getting out in the field and being outdoors and all. So I called Captain Halverson at his unit. He was the commander of Alpha Battery, 629 Field Artillery by then. And I said, hey, I says, you have a place for me? He says, I'll be in contact. I said, okay. Literally a day went by and I received orders to go to his unit. I was like, wow, this guy's got some power. And this guy was a West Point graduate and real tall, long neck. He used to, when he'd get in our case, he'd get in our face like this, jumping around, but he was always fair, he was stern and fair. So I spent the end of my time in the Army with him as my commander and really enjoyed it. And then I got out of the service, and many years later, I was driving to work because I worked in Baltimore, and so I listened to National Public Radio every day on the way to and from work. And ever hear a gal's name? I think was Ann Coulter or Ann something like that from NPR. Was here we are in Mogadishu and Afghanistan, and we're speaking to General Halverson about the security situation here. And I was my ears kind of perked up. I was like, what? And she said, General Halverson, she says, do you have anything to say about this? He started speaking, and I thought, oh my gosh, my little Butterball Lieutenant Halverson, who I last saw as a captain, is now a 3-star general. So that was a pretty cool, good leadership story. Great guy, again, very tough, in our face, making us do our jobs. But here he excelled, and to be a 3-star general, and now he's out and he's some executive at some company down in Washington, D.C. So that was a pretty cool story about leadership and officers.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting. He went from really far and clearly had a good impact on you.
Absolutely. And I really just was so proud of him when I heard her say that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just great.
Yeah. I think
that's all I have.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that, but obviously first we'd like to thank you for your service. Like, we don't get to talk to veterans usually, so it's great listening to you and hearing your story.
We appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you so much for taking your time, because it's something that I recently did. It was not initially set out to be a book, but I thought, I'm starting to get up in age, and I never really took the time to sit down with my children and explain to them what I've done over the years in my military service and all. So I'm like, you know what, maybe I'm going to document it. So what I ended up doing was, when I started documenting it, I'm like, well, I need to be a little bit formal about it, have a better format, and every time I did research, it said, publish your own book. So what I ended up doing was writing my own book. And just almost 2 years ago now, I published it. It's called Memoir of a Peacetime Soldier. And it was all because I wanted to share my stories with my children. And then it turned into this thing that was much, much bigger than that, because I had no idea that I could do it. And was very successful with it so far. I'm not making money on it or anything, but it's a great story for them, and also people like you and it's a story during peacetime as well. So it's not all this death and destruction, like we had back in Vietnam, and it's just, here's the life of a soldier. Here's what we did, day to day, every day, So that was something that I'm was very happy that I did, and I'm glad there's people like you out there that show show an interest in what we did and how we did it and what our life is like. Because it's different. It's definitely different.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? There's one thing we touched on earlier that I didn't expand on as well, which you'll find very interesting. I had mentioned that when I was at Fort Knox, we learned about computers. It's the first computer I ever saw in my life. And there was this computer called the Field Artillery Digital Automatic Computer, FADAC, we called it. And it took 4 people to carry this thing. And it was vacuum tubes. And when I walked into this place and they said, hey, you know, we got this FADAC computer here, you know, you're going to learn how to operate it. I was like, computers? Oh, okay. Heard a little bit about computers, but never ever, you know, had people at that point operated one. And then I learned how to operate that. And then they also had TI 59, Texas Instrument 59 calculators that were programmable. So you could actually program them to do calculations of firing data for artillery on that as well. So I did that, took a lot of interest. And then when I was at Fort Hood, I decided, you know what, these computers are kind of cool. So I bought a Commodore 64 and had a whopping 64 kilobytes of memory. And I learned how to work that and learned basic and disk operating system and all that. I did real well with it. And then finally I ended up getting a certificate in data processing. And when I got out of the Army, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a computer person, you know, but we went from, while my time in the Army went from nobody has a personal computer to some people have a personal computer. And now here we are today where everybody has a personal computer. So,
Yeah.
So it's a good story we're sharing.
That big of a computer, I can't even imagine.
And the artillery motivated me.
That's all we have.
Okay, so if we're all done here, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you all for your time. Brian, thank you for sharing your story.
Sure. Now, are we doing a second interview as well, or is this it?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, so I'll be reaching back out to you to get that scheduled once I find out from Sabrina when they're available again.
Okay.
Because I think what they have to do is go over this and come up with some questions to ask to further elaborate on the stuff they already learned from you today. So.
All right, great.
Okay.
Well, thank you all very much for taking the time.
Thank
You all have a great day.
Do the same. Bye-bye.
Bye.